Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Yura, and hi again. that last video was kind of crazy with the scrapyard for Hero taking up like over an hour and a half of runtime. We're chilling out for the last week here on the month of Meadowlands, and I think what better place to start than with something just like bad, like actively bad. I think you're going to see a handful of these decks over this last week. This is kind of just going to be a week of what am I currently thinking about and what am I currently trying to brew. There's going to be a handful of that, a handful of just some other decks that I haven't gotten to yet, namely like Hieratic Gishki is going to be here, Heraldic Beast is going to be here, but a lot of these are going to be decks that I am currently trying to make happen, so a lot of them are going to be under-tested, not fully built out, and definitely not fully realized. We are starting this week off with Gravekeeper, and this is kind of a weird deck in Meadowlands specifically because we are missing the additional wave of support that Gravekeeper gets that I think is present in Hat, where you have like Imperial Tombs of the Gravekeepers, something like that, or Imperial Tombs of Necro Valley, I think it's called, and like Shaman and that support wave. We don't have that. This version of Gravekeeper is, I'm not even really convinced if it's like going to be enough. This version of Gravekeeper is utilizing Royal Tribute to rip cards out of our opponent's hands, and the general advantage engine behind like Recruiter and Spy to just keep a bunch of monsters on our field repeatedly while protecting our Necro Valley with something like MALEFIC Stardust Dragon. I think there is maybe a world where we should be on something like Gravekeeper's Chief and Visionary as just like boss monsters to have around in the format. Visionary is in theory a way of sticking a boss monster that is kind of hard to get around because instead of it being destroyed, it can discard a Gravekeeper's monster instead. And we have ways of keeping Gravekeeper's monsters in our hand relatively cleanly. So I'm not super sure about this. I think another one that is potential for a slot in is Chief. And the main reason why they're just not in here right now is because I don't really know where the space for them would be. Maybe it's correct to like cut down a copy of Spy instead, because I think Spy is pretty generally weak this format. It feels a lot like Girgi Armor, where it can just get outed by like an Atlantean monster that just pops it while it's face down, and that just kind of sucks. But the real problem that I see with this deck is that the attack stats are generally pretty low. All of our Gravekeeper's monsters that we're playing currently cap out at 1600, which goes to 21 under Necro Valley, and 21 isn't like a terrible stat line, but it's also certainly not enough to beat over something like Gaios or Grapha or anything else of that sort, which is why I'm considering like Visionary or Chief, even though Visionary can't even attack under Gaios, so who knows. I think a lot of this deck is going to be utilizing some of the extra deck toolbox to make use out of the fact that these cards, specifically like Spy and Recruiter, are actually really decent advantage engines. And we also play Gravekeeper's Stele? I don't know how to pronounce this card's name, to continuously fuel our hand with Gravekeeper's monsters and keep that general flow going. So we're going to go with the card by card here and then try and give a general overview of what the deck is attempting to achieve while doing so. We are going to start off with probably like what I would consider to be our quote-unquote boss monster in lieu of playing Visionary or Chief. Those being MALEFIC Stardust Dragon, two of them. I am really enamored with the MALEFIC cards. I don't think they're very good most of the time, but like I love their aesthetic. I think they are generally really interesting monsters, and despite the fact that a lot of them are just actively terrible, like any of the MALEFIC monsters that banish a guy out of the main deck like Blue Eyes, Red Eyes, and Rainbow Dragon are actively just bad to play, Stardust and Cyber End Dragon are really interesting cards. Specifically MALEFIC Stardust Dragon. Most of the MALEFIC monsters don't really have effects, or if they do, they are in an attempt to mimic whatever monster they are based off of. Stardust actually has a unique effect among the MALEFIC monsters, and that is, it is instead of utilizing the Stardust effect where it can stop any like destruction effect by attributing itself, Malefic Stardust Dragon makes it so that face-up field spells you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. And this is really, really good for keeping your Necro Valley online, which is the main goal of Gravekeepers, is to keep Necro Valley active at all times to slow the pace of the game. I like Malefic Stardust a lot. It's also just like a really solid beater. It's nice to just be able to summon out like a level 8 guy with 2500 attack that does actually insulate your board to MST. Well, insulate your field spell to MST. The problem is if once Stardust Dragon gets removed, your Necro Valley becomes vulnerable, and if something banishes a spell trap, which I actually don't think we have a lot of in this format, it does just get around Malefic Stardust Dragon, which is a little unfortunate. But for this time period, I think Malefic Stardust is pretty solid protection, and it's also just a really cool monster that I like. And honestly, it's one of the main reasons why I wanted to play Gravekeeper, is because I know Gravekeeper around this time period is utilizing Malefic Stardust Dragon to keep their field spell safe, and I love this card. I think it's very, very cool. Onto our actual Gravekeeper monsters, though. We are on double copies of Commandant. Commandant is a spellcaster that can discard itself to the graveyard in order to add a copy of Necro Valley from your deck to your hand. This is our searchable way of like terraforming instead of actually using terraforming, because we want monsters in rotation. Probably could play a third copy of this. I don't really know what the cut is. I guess I could just play like more copies of, like, I could just play 41, I guess. Yeah, you know what? We'll play 41. This is a searcher. It's fine. We'll play 41. It's okay. But Commandant is a very simple effect. It's also one of your main beaters under Necro Valley because it does get up to 2100 underneath Necro Valley, which is really potent. That is a really solid stat line. But other than that, it's a very simple monster. It actually does have a nice benefit among the monster field spell searchers in this format, where a lot of them are like the 1900 ones that blow themselves up if your field spell isn't on the field. Commandant can actually just stay on your field without the field spell active, so it's not a normal summon that dies to MST, which is pretty nice. Next up, we've got one copy of Gravekeeper's Descendant. This is our main way of actually getting through boards. Descendant can tribute one other face-up Gravekeeper's monster in order to target a card your opponent controls and destroy that target. This card gets up to 2k underneath Necro Valley, and generally is just like fine removal. It's a really decent way of using your spent spies or getting a recruiter into the graveyard to actually get some benefit off of it, which is really nice. Descendant generally is a card that I am honestly considering playing 2 copies of, but also we have the 2 copies of Stella to get it out of the graveyard once it gets removed, so I'm not overly worried about losing it. The main problem is that if it gets banished, then we're kind of in for a problem, but again, I'm not super worried about it. We could, in theory, just play like a copy of Leviair over one of these rank 3s, but I'm not really sure yet. I don't know if we need it. Next up, we've got 3 copies of Gravekeeper Spy. This is a card that I am extremely unsure of, especially in a format where Atlantean Heavy Infantry, I think is the... No, it might be Marksman. One of the 2 Atlanteans pops face downs, and playing a flip monster as one of your main ways of just like getting advantage on the board feels really bad in this format, specifically because of that. So I'm really kind of torn on Spy, but also Spy is like a really good way of getting decent bodies into rotation and is a great fuel for your Descendant, which is your main removal in the format. So it's like, okay, I don't mind it too much. It's also like a level 4 for Xyz plays, which isn't terrible, so there's worse stuff that we could be doing with these cards for sure. The final Gravekeeper's monster, I know we're on not a lot of them, is Recruiter. Recruiter is a 1200 attack monster that, if sent to the graveyard while you control it, allows you to add a Gravekeeper's monster with 1500 or less defense from your deck to your hand. So this searches, I think, everything in our main deck except for Spy. This is actually one of the main reasons why I was considering running Chief, is because it is searchable by this, and it does allow you to reborn something out of your graveyard. The problem is that we don't really need it to reborn a guy out of our graveyard. Realistically, if Recruiter could grab Visionary, I would actively be wanting to play Visionary, but the fact that you can't find Visionary using Recruiter makes it feel really, really bad, and is one of the main reasons why I'm not actually on it, despite the fact that it is like a not terrible boss monster, but it not being searchable means I would want to play like maybe 2 copies of it, and I really, really do not want to do that in a deck like this. So we're leaving it in the binder for right now, but maybe I'll come back to it a little later. This deck is still very early on in testing, so there's a very real chance that this changes up pretty significantly over the next couple of weeks, but I wanted to like actually talk about this deck because it is something that I have been labbing recently, and it is at the very least an interesting pile of cards. Onto our spell cards, we're on a lot of generics. We're on the Wonderlord of Darkness because most of this deck is actually dark, despite the fact that Commandant is an earth. The rest of the Gravekeeper's monsters that we are on and the Malefic Stardust Dragons are all dark monsters, so we don't mind banishing them to get a little bit of extra draw power. We're also on the double copies of Instant Fusion, not on 3 because this deck, while you can make use out of the Instant Fusion targets for 4 and 3 to make some decent Xyz monsters, they're certainly not the main game plan, and more often than not, you would actually just want to be utilizing your Gravekeeper's monsters to do something like on their own, whether it's just using them under Necro Valley as just like big attackers, or using like a Descendant to get a Recruiter off the board to get an additional search, while also getting a removal effect on the board. And while you could then utilize Instant Fusion afterwards to turn the Descendant into something, I don't actually know if that's necessary, because honestly, I think just having like a 2k Descendant on the board is fine. It's certainly slow. Like, I'm not going to say this is going to like stand up to Mermail or anything like that, but like it is still a decent loop that we have going here. And it's one of the main reasons why I'm not considering Instant Fusion as like a mandatory 3 of here, because it's mostly just for toolboxing. On to some staples. We've got a Dark Hole and a Reborn. No Heavy Storm in the main because we do want our Necro Valley active at all times. And we're also on some continuous back row that we want to keep active as well. We are on a Book of Moon, though, which is kind of replacing that 1 of slot. And then we're also on 3 copies of MST alongside 2 copies of Pot of Duality, because this deck does not really special summon a whole lot during your own turn. The main exception to this is the Malefic Stardust Dragon, or if you just have a spy that has survived a turn. But in that case, you can just hold off on activating the Duality. You don't really need to use it immediately. But Duality is one of those cards in this deck where I just think it's kind of like non-negotiable. You really need to be finding like back row cards that do something to keep your board somewhat in the game. So I really wouldn't say that we should not run Duality here. Duality feels very important. As for the actual Gravekeeper's spells that we are on, because we are on a handful of them, we're going to start with Royal Tribute. Royal Tribute reads as a very simple card. If you control Necro Valley, both players discard any monsters in their hands. This is a full hand rip a lot of the times. That's crazy. That's insane. That's legitimately absurd. Don't activate it into a Dark World player, but it's really good otherwise. Don't activate it into Dark World. Please, for the love of God. I beg of you, don't do that. But into a lot of other decks, this can honestly win a game on the spot. There are not a lot of decks that can only explicitly play out of their graveyard. They do tend to need something to do in their hand. And against Mermail, if you rip like their turn 1 play out of their hand, what the hell are they going to do, right? Like, they need discarders and discard fodder, and Royal Tribute says a nuh-uh to all of it. So I'm in on Royal Tribute. I think this is the main reason to play this deck, honestly. This card is really, really good, despite how like gross and evil it is. But like, Gravekeepers need some kind of win condition, and this is certainly one of them. Next up, we've got 2 copies of Gravekeeper Stele. I'm not going to pretend I know how to pronounce this. This card allows you to target 2 Gravekeeper's monsters in your graveyard and add those targets to your hand, and this card effect cannot be negated by the effect of Necro Valley. There are not a lot of cards in this format that read target 2 archetypal monsters in your graveyard and get them back without some kind of restriction on them. I think the only other one that I'm thinking of is, what is it? Recycling batteries for thunder monsters, right? Yeah. It's like this, it's like salvage, but like, I really like having these kind of effects in a slower deck like this. I think it's really helpful. Stele is a phenomenal card, honestly, just being able to get our resource loop back online and like force our opponent who's already maybe utilized all their resources to get through like a bunch of trap cards and a handful of Gravekeeper's monsters that are just plussing us regardless, getting those additional resources back out of the graveyard while ignoring Necro Valley is really nice. Speaking of Necro Valley, we should probably talk about it. So Necro Valley has like a gajillion different erratas. This one should be the one that is legal in Meadowlands. I'm pretty certain that this is the Meadowlands one. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I'm fairly certain this is Meadowlands Necro Valley. This version of Necro Valley reads, all Gravekeeper's monsters gain 500 attack and defense. That's a really significant attack boost. If I'm going to be honest, that is really, really nice. We talked a little bit about field spells that actually give a significant attack boost in the Madolche video, and Necro Valley provides the exact same boost, albeit to monsters that don't really hit that same threshold unless you're tribute summoning monsters, but Necro Valley also does a handful of other things. Specifically, cards in the graveyard cannot be banished, which is pretty good. Negate any card effect that will move a card in the graveyard other than itself to a different place. That is a very specific effect. It feels like it only exists to stop like a DD Crow from resolving or something of the sort. I'm sure there are a handful of other cards that I'm not thinking of. I know it stops like Salvage and Reborn and things like that. So all in all, Necro Valley is a really damn good Floodgate. It will put the Floodgate on to a lot of decks in this format, and while it doesn't hit everything in the format that is meta, it does deal with a good handful of things, and I do appreciate what it does for this deck. That said, a lot of these cards are relatively simple, so we're just going to move on to our trap suite for this deck. We are on double copies of a Bottomless, double copies of Mirror Force, double copies of Dimensional Prison, and 3 Fiendish Chains. This used to be Compulse, but I think I actually value getting like a monster effect negated on board rather than just bouncing it back to your opponent's hand, because this is not a deck that is going to capitalize on a single bounce very quickly. So instead of just like stopping a monster and like keeping it locked down on the field for a Descendant to eventually remove, I think I value a little bit more than just a bounce, even though the bounce is still really good. Like, don't get me wrong, Compulse is a phenomenal card. I'm not going to say that it's not, but Chain is a card that I want to experiment with in this list. And then we're rounding out our trap lineup with the double Solemns because, you know, they're Solemns. Our extra deck is relatively simple. A lot of it is just going to be a toolbox. We're on the 2 dark instant fusion targets. I don't think they're super relevant for which ones they are. We don't really play any warriors. I think these are all spellcasters, so no real reason to run Carbonella Warrior, so I'm just on these. But you do want a level 3 and a level 4 target. We're on 2 Synchro Monsters, those being the double Stardust Dragons for the 2 Malefic Stardust Dragons. If I'm going to be honest, you could probably also play Starlight Road in here. I just don't really know where the space for that is. But also, like, I think if you're playing this deck properly, you probably don't need to be setting more than like 1 or 2 trap cards at a time, and ideally your Necro Valley is going to be protected by your Malefic Stardust Dragon, so even if a Heavy Storm does hit the board, you're not going to lose everything. The Xyz monsters that we're picking up for this are relatively straightforward. We're on a Utopia because it is an attack negate and can help keep our monsters on board a little bit longer. A Black Ship of Corn to get over Mace Strokes, a Diamond Direwolf to deal with some other problematic monsters that we otherwise don't really have a good way of outing. This is our main way of beating high attack monsters. A Mace Stroke for that same reason, and also because it is a really solid defensive tool. A Lavalval Chain to get us easier access to our Malefic Stardust Dragon, and also to set up our graveyard for a Gravekeeper Stele. An Abyss Dweller, I don't even think we need this, if I'm going to be honest, because we are already kind of locking down the graveyard. The main reason that we're on it is to stop the like Atlantean discard effects, because it would negate them as opposed to Necro Valley, which would not. So I do think it is still probably worth it. A Gaga Cowboy to beat high attack monsters again. This is one of the main things that we are afraid of in this deck. And then onto our rank 3s, we're on an Acid Golem of Destruction. This is our highest attack monster in the entire deck, and it is a pretty solid one at that. We don't special summon monsters a whole lot, so its downside isn't too bad. The problem is you kind of have to end the game relatively quickly once it does hit the board, because otherwise you are in for a world of hurt. Next up, we've got 1 copy of Tempo, the Percussion Djinn. This is a rank 3 method of ripping Xyz materials off your opponent's monsters, which we do appreciate. It is a way of slowly getting rid of Gaios's negate effects, which is pretty nice, or at the very least it'll bait it out. And when Tempo does resolve, it boosts all Djinn monsters on the field, so that being Maestroke and itself by 500, which is not a insignificant attack boost. And then we're on 2 copies of Zen mains as just like solid rank 3 protection. I think one of these could probably be Levier, but I don't really know if we need it. Our side deck is also relatively standard. I will say Thunder King Ryo is probably a card we could main deck. I just don't really know where the space is. I think in an event, I do end up cutting Instant Fusion. I think the Ryo would probably take that space, but I want to mess around with Instant Fusion for now, even though I don't think it's super necessary. Ryo is a phenomenal card, though. It is really, really good. The problem is that Ryo conflicts directly with Recruiter, which feels really bad. And it also conflicts with Commandant, so not ideal. Next up, we're on the 3 copies of Max C because we are on a slower deck and we like drawing cards. 1 Heavy Storm for going second, 3 Lightning Vortex for going second, 3 Mind Crush and 3 Debunk for that Mermail matchup, and a handful of other things as well. Mind Crush also just good to do Spellbook and also not Dark World. I almost said Dark World, not Dark World. Just good to do some other matchups that are playing like things that add to hand. And then Debunk is just really good for dodging the Atlantean effects that would otherwise tend to eat us alive. But that's it for Gravekeeper. We are going to hop into some games and see if this whack brew can actually do anything. And God, I hope it does, because I really like some of the cards in this deck. So we're going to hop over there and see how it performs. All right, we're sending Gravekeeper into Gladiator Fist. And this is a very funny matchup. We have a lot of monsters that want to, in theory, be run over, but we don't want them to be run over in a way that pluses our opponents too hard. So this is going to be a really interesting balance to try and field with trying to get our advantage engine online without letting our opponent run away with this game. Game 1, we're starting off with a Spy, a second Spy, a Commandant, a Fiendish Chain, a Judgment into our opponent's Prisma, Dark Hole, War Chariot, Andal, and Valor. Let's see what we can do here. We're going to draw for turn into a Malefic Stardust Dragon, and this is kind of everything. We've got Necro Valley, we've got the thing to protect the Necro Valley, and we've got a Spy online backed up with some nice trap cards. Our opponent's going to lead this copy of Dark Hole, which we are going to negate with the Judgment as they draw into a bottomless trap hole. They're going to go for this copy of Andal. Andal is not going to run into a Spy because they have kind of sussed it out that is in fact a Spy. They are going to set their War Chariot and they bottomless, and then we are going to draw into a Royal Tribute. We're going to set this copy of Spy, rip this Royal Tribute down, and they are going to lose their Prisma from hand while also activating this copy of Valor, targeting down our Stardust Dragon. We're going to get our Stardust Dragon negated. We are going to try to flip up this Spy, which is going to get eaten by the War Chariot, and we're going to swing in with the Malefic Stardust Dragon. We probably could have done that beforehand, but we wanted to get a little bit of extra damage down. They're going to summon out this Darius and walk into our Gravekeeper Spy. Spy is going to summon out Descendant, and then they're going to trigger the Darius to get themselves a Marmillo. Marmillo is going to trigger to out our Malefic Stardust Dragon, but we are going to pop the Fiendish Chain to get that guy negated. Back to us, we find a second Royal Tribute, which does not currently do anything. We're going to go this copy of Descendant to hit this bottomless trapple, which they probably should have just ripped on our Descendant summon, but it is what it is. They find a Hero Lives off the top and realize that we can't kill him here because the only thing that can attack is the Malefic Stardust. We're going to set this Instant Fusion and then pass back to our opponent after sinking 25. They're going to find a Reborn and go for this copy of a Hero Lives, summoning up this Prisma before going for the Prisma, binning this Bestiary, and then activating the Reborn, forgetting that Necro Valley is on board. It is what it is. That happens to the best of us. Game 2. All right, our Game 2 hand is looking significantly worse. No access to Necro Valley, and we do still have some decent trap cards, but just Spy is not going to be enough if our opponent is able to get through things. They've opened Hero Lives, Tenki, Andal, and Double Valor into our Double Spy, Max C, Mirror Force, and Dimensional Prison, and it's their turn to go first. So let's see what they can do here. They find a Prisma off the top. They're going to normal summon out this Prisma, and we're going to Max C. We rip that Max C because I fear them going for Prisma and then summoning out like a Test Tiger and then popping off from there. So I rip the Maxi a little early and maybe don't get a whole lot of advantage out of it because they don't do anything past that. We find a Book of Moon off the top and then just set the Spy and then our whole hand. They're going to find a Laquari off the draw and go for this Gorilla, which is going to eat our Book of Moon before then going into a copy of the Volval Chain. Chain is going to stack to the top of their deck a copy of a Rescue Rabbit before passing back to us. It is on us to flip this Spy up. We're going to go the Spy, which is going to get negated by the Valor, and we're going to set this second copy of Spy and this MST. They're going to find the Rabbit they stacked off the top of the deck and then send, using the Volval Chain to get a Bestiary in the graveyard. They're going to go this copy of Rabbit to get double Andal, and then they're going to Xyz summon into Papilloperative. Papilloperative is going to switch our Spy to face up, and we're going to get a Recruiter for our troubles. They're going to walk in to the Spy, but lose their entire board to the Mirror Force. Back to us, we find a Malefic Stardust Dragon, not currently doing anything, so we're just going to make this Utopia to try and stave off any Gladiator Beast shenanigans. It's back to them. They find a Darius off the top and go for this copy of Hero Lives. Hero Lives is going to summon out this Prisma. Prisma is going to reveal the Heraklinos to dump a Laquari and then go this copy of Laquari, which is going to get negated by our Utopia. They're going to go into a Diamond Direwolf. Diamond Direwolf is going to out our Utopia, and we do still have this Dimensional Prison on board just in case. We're going to swap our Recruiter to attack and sink a nice 1200 damage. They're very low on life, and they're going to find a Warrior Chariot up the top. They're going to have this Darius. Darius is going to attempt to walk into the Recruiter and is going to meet this Dimensional Prison. So now it's just up to us to out this Warrior Chariot with the MST and try and find lethal. Here we find a Spy up the top, which is lethal on its own, but we're going to go for the Instant Fusion to get into a Flame Ghost and then make an Acid Goal of Destruction to walk in for 3k, wrapping up this match. So Gravekeeper still definitely has a long way to go. I think this is a really good starting point, though. I want to find more ways of getting Necro Valley online more often, whether that's just cutting down to 40 cards so we find the commandants more often, or incorporating some copies of Terraforming. I'm not really sure yet. I barely even saw like half the cards in this deck when we played that set. Like I didn't see the Stellae, I didn't see the Dualities, so it's hard to say whether or not how like I feel about this deck right now because it has such little actual testing. But my first impressions are that it's not awful. It's certainly not likely going to be anything like really powerful, but I do think the actual core of cards here do make up for an interesting anti-meta strategy, especially given how potent Necro Valley is and how many decks it can just kind of shut down. So while the deck isn't perfect and while there's definitely still some more work to be done, I am pretty happy with where things are at, and I'm definitely okay with wrapping this video up here. A little bit of a shorter one to kind of offset how long the hero video was, but we've still got plenty more to cover in the month of Meadowlands. Still got a whole other week, and I'm really excited to get to the rest of them. So I'm going to hop out of here, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye!